Hey, my name is Victor and today I want to show you how I edited this picture into this. If you want to follow along, I put the raw file in the description below. You can download it and edit it for yourself. Alright, so the image we're working with today is this image shot at Mount Assiniboine at sunset in late September. You can see the beautiful fall colors in the trees and a beautiful warm sunset light coming in from the right. It's a beautiful, beautiful location. And let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to even out my exposure a little bit. You can see it's underexposed a little bit just to make sure there's enough details in the highlights left. So I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit, bring down our highlights quite a bit just to bring back detail into the sky. Bring up the shadows just a little bit to even that a little bit more. Then I'm going to bring down my whites a little bit and bring up my blacks so you can really see, and bring up my blacks so you can really see we've got a very flat image right now. We're just bringing out all the detail that's in that raw file, and yeah, there's quite a bit of that here. So we can see that there's a little bit of purple fringing going on in the sides here. That's why we're going to come down all the way here and click remove chromatic aberration. That's going to get rid of that for us. Perfect. While we're down here, we're going to remove the profile corrections too. We're going to enable the profile corrections too. You can see it doesn't, for some reason Lightroom doesn't recognize the lens I was using, so I'm just going to come down and select that one. It was a Sigma, and yeah, that's the correct one, a Sigma 17 to 72.8. Perfect. I'm just going to bring down the vignetting again because I actually quite don't like the vignetting on this lens, so I'm going to leave that in there. And that's a great place to start. Let's come back up here. Let's make sure our temperature is great. Auto worked pretty well. That's a good starting temperature. I like this. Yeah, that's good to start with. Okay, you can see we've got a very flat image to work with right now. Obviously, we need to bring a lot more contrast into that. That's way too flat. I'm gonna go to the tone curves right now. Basically what the tone curve does is you can make different points on this curve and drag it up and down and affect the image. Essentially, things on the left side will affect the shadow. So if you can see, I raised this, then I raised the dark parts of the image, or I darken the dark parts of the image. The middle is the midtones, so if I'm gonna affect this, you can see I'm affecting the midtones, and the top is obviously the highlights of the image. So you can see I'm bringing down the highlights or bringing up the highlights. I'm just gonna flatten this main one for now, and I'm gonna come in here and go to the separate ones for the different color channels, red, green, and blue. I'm going to start with the red one. I'm just going to click once on this middle point here, just to make sure that stays right there for now. And I'm going to bring this one down just a little bit, right around there, and that's good. Obviously that doesn't look great, so we're going to come to the green one here. I'm going to click in the middle again. I'm going to bring that down a little bit into this kind of an S curve, just around the same spot as I did for the red one. And we're going to do that once more for the blue. The blue, we're going to do basically the same thing. Quickly there, and that should be good to start somewhere around there. If you press Alt or Option, you can kind of affect that in a more slower way. So that's a good place to start. It's obviously still looking a little bit on the green side, so I'm going to go to the green and see if I can correct that a little bit. I see mostly the shadows are pretty green, so I'm going to bring that down just a tiny little bit, and that's looking a little bit better. And then I want the highlights to look a little bit more red at this point, because there's just a little bit more red in those highlights in that warm light coming in. So I'm just going to affect that really a little bit. That's with and without that. You can see there's a lot being done. It's looking a little bit magenta, but we can fix that later. So we're going to come down to the RGB here, and here we're going to pretty much do the opposite thing. I want to bring a little bit more evenness back into the image to get a little bit of a base contrast. I think this is a great place to start. Let's see without and with. So we brought up a little bit more contrast, a little bit more color in there. That's awesome. And we're gonna come back up here. So at this point, I'm gonna press Alt or Option on the Mac and drag up my whites till I get my white point. So when the first white point starts to appear, that's kind of where I'm gonna stop it. I'm gonna do the same thing for the blacks. I'm gonna press Alt or Option and drag them down until I get my first little dots appearing there in the corner. And that should be good. Great. This is looking like a great base exposure. If you see the before and after, we've done quite a lot already. And it's starting to look pretty good. I'm actually gonna bring down tint a little bit towards the green side. I think it was a little bit too magenta. Perfect. And at this point too, I'm gonna bring down the saturation just a little bit. And I'm gonna bring back those colors a bit later, but for now we're gonna bring that down. So what I'm gonna do next, I'm gonna go all the way down here till I get to the calibration tab. What I'm gonna do here is, essentially when you look at this image, there's two main colors, which is basically the orange and the blue. That's very lucky for me to work with because, as you probably know, orange and blue are complementary colors or contrasting colors, and they work very well together. So we wanna make sure that everything in the image is kind of working in that favor. So what I don't necessarily like about some of the trees down here, that they're looking very greenish, yellowish, and I want to bring that a little bit more towards the oranges so it fits in a little bit with the overall color theme of the image. So I'm going to come down to the green primary here, and I'm going to drag those greens a little bit to the right side, and as I can see it, I'll do this too much. You can see it's much more towards an orange red. If I would do this to the left side, you can see it's much more yellow. So we're going to keep it a little bit towards the orange, and that should be good. We'll bring up the saturation a little bit there as well. Cool. So I'm going to do the same thing for the blue primary. Obviously, if you turn it to the right, you can see this starts looking green and pink. Not great, not what we want. But if you do it to the left, you can see it looks orange and blue. This is obviously way too much, so we're going to do this very subtly. And I think even around this should be more than enough. And I'm going to look if this is actually something I want to do. Add a little bit more saturation in there or not. I think I'm just gonna keep that at 0 for now. Let's take a look at the reds too. So bring a little bit of saturation into the reds. And I'm gonna bring the hue just a tiny bit to the left for the reds too. So let's see what we did with the calibration tab. Off and on. Off and on. Quite a subtle difference, but you can see that those yellows have gone a little bit more orange. The overall colors of the image just work a little bit better together. And that's exactly what we want. So we're gonna go back up here. I'm gonna go down or up to the HSL tab. I've got it set on all so I can see the hue, saturation, and luminance at the same time. What I'm gonna do here is, again, I'm gonna affect those yellows a little bit more, and I'm gonna grab the hue of the yellows. And if I do this to the right, you can see it becomes green. If I bring this to the left, you can see it becomes orange. That's obviously way too much. You want to be subtle again. So I'm going to bring this just a tiny little bit down, not too much. Perfect. I'm going to bring up a little bit more saturation again into the oranges. Again, you want to be pretty subtle, and into the yellows as well. That's perfect. While I'm here, I'm going to drag down those blue luminance a little bit, just to bring a little bit more darkness into the blues. And I might bring up aqua if that helps with the lakes, but it doesn't, so I'm going to keep that there, and that's good for now. We're going to come all the way back up now, all the way back up here, and we're going to use these local adjustments here. First things, I'm going to use a graduated filter because I want to darken the sky a little bit. I want to bring a little bit more attention to the center of the image, not the top. Essentially, your eyes will go to places in the image that are more contrasty or more bright. So we want to darken that sky a little bit to bring more attention to the middle of the frame, to the mountains. So I'm going to drag a graduated filter down here. And with this first one, all I'm going to do is essentially drag down the highlights a little bit. So I'm first going to reset this effect here. And I'm going to drag down the highlights for this one. So something like this looks pretty good. We're dragging down the highlights, we get a little bit more detail in our clouds, in our sky, and a little bit on those highlights of the mountains as well, as you can see, which is great because they were blown out a little bit too much. And that's a good starting point. I'm actually going to add another graduated filter at this point. I'm going to click new, add another one pretty much like it. And again, reset the effect here, but this time I only wanted to affect the blues of the sky. So I'm gonna go to range mask down here, click that, click color. Then I'm gonna click the little eyedropper tool here and select a range of color that I want to be affected. This range is basically just the blues in the sky. I wanna make sure that I don't select the clouds because I don't want it to affect the clouds. Perfect, once I've done that, I'm just gonna drag down the exposure for those blues a little bit, and you can see you're bringing back this more detail and richness to the sky. which is great. Perfect, that's a good spot to leave that at. I'm gonna click done here. Next up, I'm gonna go to the adjustment brush here. I'm gonna click that. And I wanna brighten up the lakes to start with here. They're a little bit too dark in my opinion. I wanna brighten them up just a little bit. So I'm gonna click here on auto mask. I'm gonna reset my effect here for a second too. And I'm gonna click O, so I can see what I'm affecting. So with auto mask on, hopefully what it's gonna do is gonna color it kind of inside the lines of the lakes if it does a good job. As you can see, it's doing a pretty good job on that edge here. So I'm just gonna quickly color that in. I'm not gonna be too precise, and I'll clean up the edges a little bit after. So that's a good starting point. Make sure I colored in everything I want to color in. And I'm gonna zoom in a little bit on here, and I'm gonna press Alt or Option on the Mac so I get the negative brush so I can take things away. I wanna make sure that it's on auto mask again, and I'm just gonna go over the edges and clean them up a little bit so get away of any red color that's not inside the lake. You can be very precise with this, but I'm gonna do this pretty roughly right now, just for the sake of the image. Making selections like this is definitely easier in Photoshop as well, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're gonna stick in Lightroom because you can do all this stuff with Lightroom too. Awesome, that's a good spot to start. So I'm just gonna do the same for the other two lakes. I'm just gonna do that in one filter. So color it in, clean up the edges a little bit. All right, that should be good. So we're gonna bring active fit. As you can see, they're pretty rough selections, but for now that's okay. I'm gonna press O again to make sure the red goes away. And I'm just gonna brighten up those lakes just a little bit. Don't wanna do it too much. Something like this should be good. I'm gonna bring up the saturation a little bit as well. Not too much, you don't want it to look very weird and unrealistic. Something out there is good. I also think the lakes are a little bit too magenta, so I'm gonna drag down the tint a little bit towards the more greenish blue, more emerald looking almost. Something like that should be great. So just without that and with that. That looks better for sure. Next up, I'm gonna go and click on a new adjustment brush, and I'm just gonna do some dodging and burning. Essentially what that means is I'm gonna darken certain parts of the image and brighten certain parts of the image with the goal of creating more depth. And also I'm gonna darken the parts of the image that I don't want people to necessarily look at and brighten the part of the image that I want your attention to go to. So I wanna make sure my auto mask is off here. I'm just gonna go exposure -10, bring a little bit of shadows down as well, something like this. And with a pretty big brush, I'm just gonna brush over the areas that I wanna darken. So definitely this dark part in the bottom here, there's no reason to be looking there. And here too, perfect. And the same thing here on the sides a little bit. I want your eye to go away from that, not towards it. I'm gonna even bring a little bit more gradient into that sky, especially the left side of it, where it's the darker side of the image. And then I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller. And I'm gonna go over the shadowy or darker areas on the mountains as well to make those a little bit darker too. Bring in just that little bit more contrast into the mountain too. So I'm being pretty rough with this. You can be a little bit more precise if you want. There, that's good. Here's some more shadow we can color in. That's it. And those little shadows here too. Again, what this is going to do is going to bring in a lot more localized contrast and a little bit more depth into the image in a very, very controlled way, which is, again, what we want. So if you press O again, you can see what you're affecting. I don't necessarily like that it's affecting that peak here, so I'm going to clean that up a little bit. I'm going to make that a little bigger so it's a little bit more gradual again. I think we're just doing a little bit too much there. I'm actually going to take that sky out all again and do that again. So with that plus, I'm just going to bring that in a little bit more subtly this time. That's good enough. All right, let's press O again to turn that off. That's great. Perfect. So again, still with this brush on, I'm going to come to this darker side of this mountain here too and just color that in a little bit. That's good. Same thing with all those darker parts of the mountain here. That's perfect. And down here too. Okay, I do think we made it a little bit too dark, so I'm just gonna play with this a tiny bit. Do it a little bit more subtly. Cool, and that's looking okay. I'm gonna create a new brush, and this time we're gonna brighten things up a little bit, so I'm just gonna create a little bit more brightness there. And just very subtle again, maybe a little bit wide as well, just a little bit. That's perfect. And I'm gonna do the same thing, just brighten up the parts of the image I want brightened up. So any nice light areas, that's kind of where I want that attention to go to. Here, it's nice and bright too. Perfect. I'm actually gonna bring in a little bit of contrast at the same point too, so we don't wash out the shadowy areas that we touch. Just like that, that's good. Same thing on this mountain here. I'm gonna brighten that up a little bit. I actually want to brighten up this here too, just to create more of an edge between the two mountains. It's very, very subtle, but it will make a difference. Brighten up these snowy areas too. Should bring in a little bit more detail there. I'm going to do the same for all these snowy areas on this mountain here, just to make them a little bit more brighter, create a little bit more interest and contrast there. Just press quickly O to see what we're affecting. I think we can affect that here as well still. And this. Let's press that again, see what we're doing. How's that looking? Looks like we're affecting the right places. Here a little bit of these trees as well, maybe. That's kind of where I want your eyes to go. A little bit here too. And then I'm gonna make a little bit of a line of that over this too, so your eye kind of gets dragged into the image that way too. That's looking good for now. Just let's see before and after those brushes. You can see this makes quite a big difference, and I'm being very, very rough with them, but you can see still it's not really showing, and it makes a huge, huge difference. So while we're up there, I'm going to grab another of these brushes, and this time I'm going to reset the effect again, make sure my auto mask is off, and bring the clarity down just a little bit. I'm going to make a fairly big brush, and the same kind of areas that I don't necessarily want people to look at too much, I'm going to decrease the clarity just a tad. That way again, so we can see what we're affecting here. That way again, if I drag that down a lot, you can see that those areas become much, much softer, and what's really standing out is that peak in the middle. That's more like crispy and contrasty. I'm not going to do it this much, obviously, because it looks a little bit fake and weird. So you just want to be pretty subtle with it. And so much that you barely see that it's happening, but it does have an effect subconsciously. So that's a good spot to leave that at again. Next up, while we're here, I'm going to grab a radial filter here. And I want to just accentuate that light coming in from the right side a little bit better. It's this beautiful warm sunset light that I just want to accentuate. So I'm going to drag in a radial filter from here, kind of from where the sun is coming, somewhere on there. You can angle it a little bit like that as well. Perfect. So if I press O again, you can see what it's affecting. This time it's affecting the outside, which is not what we want. We want it to affect the inside. So we're going to click invert. This way it will affect the inside. And then I think it's a little bit too harsh, so we're going to adjust the feather. Basically, if you drag the feather to the left, you can see it makes this really hard edge, and if you drag it all the way to the right, it's very subtle and gradual. We want subtle and gradual, so that's what we're going to go with. And press O again to get rid of the red. I'm going to get that clarity to the normal again, and we're going to bring up the exposure here. That might be a little bit too much. Something like that should be fine. And we're gonna bring up the temperature too. See how that looks. That's okay. A little bit of magenta in there too to make it a little bit more orange and not yellow. That looks great. What I'm gonna do too at the same point is increase the contrast a little bit, just a little bit, and decrease the shadows just a little bit to make it integrate more, to make sure we're not washing out too many shadows there. And to make sure, yeah, that it just doesn't look slapped on or fake or anything like that. What we're gonna do here again is add a new radial filter again from kind of the same area. We're just gonna make this one a little bit smaller so we get a more gradual effect in there. Again, here we want to invert the mask. I want to make sure that we reset it. And we're gonna bring the feather all the way up and bring the exposure up. A little bit less than that maybe. A little bit more warmth from the side there. And something like that, a little bit of magenta again. A little bit of contrast in there again. Just to compensate for that brightness so we're not washing it out. We'll see what that looks like before and after. So this is before. And that's after. That looks pretty good. We're gonna add one more of this radial filter. Just an even smaller one. Make sure that we invert that here. Do 100% feather. And then we're just gonna add a little bit more light in there. A little bit more warmth too. Let's see what that looks like. If we really go overboard, that's a little bit too much obviously, so that should be fine. And a little bit more tint there too. Again, bring back a little bit of contrast. And that way we've made a very subtle light leak almost, but in a way that looks very natural. So if we turn that off and on, you can see we've made quite a bit of difference, but it looks natural, it looks okay. And that's what we're going for. Perfect, so we're done here with the radial filters. Next up, while we're here in the local adjustments, I'm gonna click spot removal here. I'm seeing this little dust spot here that I'm gonna remove. Just wanna click on that and hopefully it's removed. There's one here too. Perfect, and I think just this little spot here is a little bit distracting. How there's this one little bright spot, so I'm gonna delete that too. That's better. You see this little dark smudge cloud here? I'm gonna delete that as well. I think it just distracts from the image there. I like it to look a little bit cleaner than that. That's perfect, that looks better. So I'm gonna just look around and see if there's any other distracting elements in the photo. I think maybe here in the bottom, this little white spot is a little bit distracting, so we're gonna get rid of that as well. Hopefully this does a good job. You can do this better in Photoshop again, but for now we'll just keep doing it here. And that looks pretty good, I think. I don't think there's anything else that's really too distracting. Maybe this lonely cloud we can get rid of too. Let's see what that does. Kind of sticks there. So let's see where it's taking it from. Okay, let's try that. That's better. Great, there we go. So now that we've gotten rid of some of the distractions, I think that looks a little bit better, a little bit cleaner. We'll do a quick before and after. So this is before all our edits, and this is after all our edits. It's starting to look pretty good. We're still up here in the gradual, or in the local adjustments, and I'm gonna grab another brush, and this might seem like overkill. I'm doing quite a lot of brushes, but I do think that all these subtle adjustments make a big difference. And I'm gonna just create one more darkening brush. I do want this area on the left side in the bottom to look even just a little bit darker. Just to really not bring too much attention to that, and I think that looks great. Then I'm gonna bring another one of these brushes in, a new one, reset the effect. And I'm gonna increase the texture here a little bit. And a little bit of, let's say a little bit of contrast by bringing some whites up and some blacks down. And I'm gonna go over the areas of the image again that I want to look very crisp and clear and contrasty, which is obviously the main subject. In the middle, our mountain. So I'm just gonna drag over this wherever I do want there to be a little bit more contrast or clarity. And again, it's super, super subtle. You're probably not gonna notice a lot of that, but I like to think that it makes a difference in the end. All right, so let's see what happens if we overdo that texture effect. You can see there's a lot of texture coming in. It's way too much. So that's why we're keeping this very subtle. Somewhere around there should be fine. Perfect, okay. Then let's come down to the sharpening tab. Yeah, this image is not the sharpest. You can see it's shot on a crop sensor camera. So we're just gonna bring up the sharpening here. I like around 90, I think is a great spot. You can see that that sharpens quite a bit. It looks quite a bit better already. Then of course we're gonna wanna bring up the masking. Essentially what that does is everything that's, so we're gonna press Alt or Option on the Mac, and everything that's white is gonna be sharpened. Obviously we don't want the sky to be sharpened or anything like that, as you can see now, because it's just gonna sharpen noise. We wanna only sharpen the things that actually need to be sharpened. So we're gonna drag this slider up until somewhere around here. Everything that's white is being sharpened. Everything that's black isn't. I think that's a good spot. I do want quite a bit of sharpening in this image because it wasn't super sharp to begin with. So I think this is a good spot. Perfect. So then we're gonna come down here, and the luminance is usually meant for noise reduction. So in this image, it's shot at ISO 100, and if we go look into the darker areas, the lighter areas, there's not too much noise in this image. So I don't think we need to do anything there. So yeah, I think we're at a pretty good spot here. I don't think there's too much we need to change here. I might tweak some little things here and there. I think I'm actually gonna bring in one more graduated filter here from this side. This is kind of the darker side, there's less sunlight on that side. So I'm gonna reset that effect here. And what I'm gonna only do there is just slightly drag down that exposure really, really subtly. Bring down a little bit of the blues here to make out a little bit more blue on that side. We've got the warm side and the little bit darker bluer side. That's perfect. I'm gonna leave it at that. And here again, I do want to increase the drama here a little bit. I do want a little bit more brightness. I'm gonna mostly bring that in the highlights. That's too much for sure. So we don't want to affect the sky too much. So I'm just gonna, and that looks pretty good. Again, come down to this guy, bring that one up a little bit more. Bring that up a little bit more. It's all about the subtlety there, right? There you go. Yeah, and just to give you an idea of how much those local adjustments do, I'm just gonna come down here all the way and find my first graduated filter edit. So bring it back to without any local adjustments. And I'm gonna come back up here and bring them all back. So with, and as you can see, that's a huge, huge difference. So I do rely on that quite a bit in my edits, and I think it's just a really great tool to use. So there's actually one more thing I would like to do, and I'm gonna bring in one more of these brushes, reset the effect. And what I'm gonna do is, I think this ledge here in the front is just really nice, leading up to the mountains here. But I think it's kind of like stopped here by these trees not being very bright, by this being very dark. So I wanna brighten up these yellow trees here just a little bit to kind of continue that leading line towards the mountain. So I'm gonna come in here, increase the exposure a little bit, increase the saturation as well, and get a little bit more contrast so it integrates well with the rest of the image. And then I'm just gonna color in here the yellow trees. So this is obviously a little bit rough, but we'll adjust that in a bit. And then just here as well, a small little brush. Just gonna take away a little bit here again. So we're gonna increase that saturation a little bit. Make it look a little bit better than it does right now. Maybe a little bit less exposure and just a little bit more contrast. Let's see how that looks. That looks a bit better. A little bit of temperature increase there. And a little bit of these magenta in there. Not too much. A little bit of the whites. And decrease black a little bit. There we go. So without that one, it's like this, and with that one, it looks like this, which is, in my opinion, better. Perfect, so that's it. That's our image. We'll do another before and after. Before and after. I think we did pretty well. All right, that was it. If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments below. I'll answer them. I hope you learned something. If you did, please consider subscribing and liking this video. I'd love to see your edits as well of the raw file. Send them to me on Instagram and I'll share my favorites in my stories. I hope you have a good day. Stay safe and I'll see you in the next one.